So the deal was I was going last because I've already spoken. So I'm not going to use my full 20 minutes so that we allow some time for discussion. So if I don't get quite to the end of it, bear with me. But that was the plan. So you've had quite a lot of me. I've had airtime. But I'm really delighted that Ali Wendy gave me this opportunity to share a little bit about teachers creating tools for change. I've been very fortunate in my career to have the opportunity to work with quite a lot of teachers. So just really want to acknowledge both the funding sources in New Zealand that have supported teacher research and also the teacher researchers who've been very dynamic in creating tools for change and have included me in their projects. And I've also acknowledged Margaret Carr was part of the first one with Centres of Innovation, Vanessa Parkey, who's been to Scotland a few times, and my friend Karen Davis for the TLRI, and of course all the families and the other teachers and the children that are part of these studies that make it possible. So the first one I was going to talk about briefly is Centres of Innovation. That now no longer exists, but it was a really important foundational project really for increasing the opportunity for teachers to do their own research. I think they ran 3 waves of it with several projects each time, and it was very much teacher-led, and it was the opportunity for teachers to do research. It was at the point where people were challenging university research not being picked up and used by teachers. So how could we do this differently? And the teachers were supported by an experienced researcher to help them with doing their research, but they were very much the drivers of that research. The one that I was fortunate to work with was Manly Bridge Kindergarten. They are actually one of the few centres of innovation who publish their work as a book, and the 3 teachers who led that are the 3 first authors of the book. We get quite a lot of royalties from that, so it's obviously still purchased quite frequently. And the rationale was working towards a successful transition to school. And what was really interesting was how these early childhood teachers managed to bring their community on board in doing this research and getting a kind of a community approach to transition in their area. This is one of their photographs that they used to say this is how they thought about transition, this kind of leap into something new. And what they were trying to do in their work was create a safe and satisfying landing, so that it's exciting, it's new, it's not without its challenges, but that you can land safely. I am going quite fast, as you'll notice. So lots of different data that they collected, and the teachers did the majority of that. I did a little bit so that we could get some independent views of what they were doing, but for the main, they collected their own data. Many of you will know about taking the portfolios to school, but for us in New Zealand, this was one of the first projects where that happened. So the early childhood portfolio going into school. And that has been a strategy that's been used very widely now as a way of opening up the child to the new environment. What did this child bring? Oh, that's interesting. It's changed a little bit. But this is a new entrant teacher saying, I noticed even the most shy children, when they've got their portfolio, they seem to have a sense of confidence. It's the ownership over something. The fact the other children in the class are acknowledging the prior learning that's in there. And you can see those children here poring over each other's portfolios, very often bringing them to share, having a look, I've got that in mine, what have you got in yours? So a really useful tool. And this teacher was saying it gave her the opportunity to find out about the child's interest, background, friendships and so on, that would otherwise take her a long time to learn. They involved buddies. So the children were visited by buddies from the school. It became a really good process. The children in the school who wanted to be buddies had to put a CV in, they were interviewed, they had some training, and then they came down and worked in the early childhood centre once a week with the 4-year-old children that were heading into school soon. That happened for a term, once a week for a term. And then when they moved to school, the buddy gave the tour around the school. The parents loved that. You've got a child's eye view of the school. The children had a familiar older person at school who they could seek out when they needed to, and they became their read-to buddy when they were at school. There were many benefits for both the older ones and the younger ones. And this idea was actually one of the father's ideas. So in terms of bringing in a community response, different people started to suggest things. I'm just going to go quite quickly. As I said, they started to use photo boards in the kindergarten, the school, and the people at school would be on the photo board, and the children going to that school could put their photos underneath. So children started to see who's going to what school, and And families like that, they could pair up and make some contact with other families before they went. And then they felt a bit bad taking the photos off the board after the child went to school, so they created books. So each school would have its book with the photos of the children that had gone to school. Children like to look and see who went, and also often children coming back to kindergarten like to find themselves back in the book. Just children chatting about seeing where they're going. The school, one of the schools, promoted a DVD about starting school, and it became a project for the children at school to make the DVD. So they created this DVD themselves, a storyline of who children would meet at school, some of the things that you do at school to give a positive insight. And the children at kindergarten would watch this, and they could have the opportunity to have copies to take home. And we've seen that go into other schools since, and children are loving that opportunity to just watch and re-watch. So in terms of a community approach, the teachers created these diagrams to say when they started, they felt it was all new. So it started very much with the early childhood teachers trying things. And these swirly diagrams are about who started it and then who else came on board and how long it took to get them on board. And the things that were particularly successful, they called mutually interesting projects because different people would come on board and participate. So the buddies, it started with a parent and then it brought other people into that. So the ones that persisted were the ones that other people found interesting too. The TLRI is another source that we have in New Zealand where teachers can engage in their own research. And again, the Centres of Innovation is for 3 years. TLRIs can be 1, 2 or 3 years, and it's a partnership approach. So teachers work in partnership with somebody from the university. This one here was teacher researchers from 3 early childhood centres and 2 schools who again wanted to explore transition to school within their communities. And I'm going to go quite quickly about from this one, but one of the things that they did was create little action research projects. And the teachers in early childhood and school discussed and determined which action research projects they'd like to try. And often it was just a pair of teachers doing something. Sometimes a wider group came involved. I really like this because the traditional action research is very, you follow your cycles, but what would happen is things would spin off from other things, and I think McNiff captures that really nicely. So there's a whole community approach, lots of shared planning between the early childhood and the school, events that we might both be interested in. So when children moved, you've been looking at this in early childhood and you could look at it further at school. I'm really conscious of time, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but lots of different things that they trialled. In terms of opening up the spaces between, and I've got 3 I've taken as examples. One was the school children coming back to visit the preschool. So in New Zealand, it's very common that early childhood children go to school. It was less common that children come back. And the idea was they brought something about school to talk about. And the early childhood children were involved in hosting, so they made the morning tea and set the room up, and the school people came back, and it was fascinating. And we actually were able to record what they talked about. And the peers from school were amazing in what they told. And we interviewed the 4-year-olds afterwards about what they gained from it. And the learning was incredible. So the things that they picked up and shared. In one of the early childhood centres, they were aware that the children, as they moved to school, found it hard to use a lunchbox at school. They had all the food provided in early childhood. So they had lunchbox Fridays, where they could prepare their own food and create their own lunchbox and then sit down together and eat from the lunchbox. And the children moving to school, when we interviewed them, were really confident about what you did with your lunchbox, what you ate for morning tea, and you're eating your sandwiches first and so on. So small things, but quite a very good research project. And the playground. Playground was really big. It has been in quite a few studies about, it's a whole transition in itself sometimes. And they created a video, child narrated about the playground. They made a shared book to talk about, so children in early childhood and school could talk about the playgrounds. And I really like this one. They made a safe space to play outside the new entrant classrooms with toys. quite unusual in our schools. There's big playgrounds with equipment, but having this little box of toys made a difference, because children had something to do if they didn't have a friend, but it's much easier to make a friend if you're sitting alongside and there's things to play with. So I think what we found was there was greater initiative from the early childhood centres in things that they could do to make a difference to children. And we found in school really subtle and nuanced approaches to working with the individual child and their families. I think it opened up, the one size doesn't fit all, and they were really sensitive in what they did. Shared activities to build understandings. On the slide I skipped through, they had day in the life opportunities, so they observed for a day in each other's setting. But then the task was to talk to that other teacher and find out why he or she does the things that she does or he does. A lot more interested about learning about children's interests and competencies, so that these are opened up and able to be used in school. So exactly what you were talking about, the rich things they bring. Stronger links with the families, a cultural audit of resources. One of our early childhood centres was a Māori medium centre, and just realising there wasn't much that was familiar for those children when they went to school. So the early childhood teachers did an audit and then offered suggestions of really good equipment that might be useful, and books that the children enjoy. And the teachers went on to develop a lot more cultural knowledge and language skills. The last one I want to mention is a new fund that we had that's kind of replaced the CRIs, so we've still got TLRIs, and now we've got this teacher-led innovation fund. And it supports teams of teachers from all sorts of education backgrounds to develop their innovative practices and research those and share them. And they have a university researcher as a critical friend. And I'm really lucky to be involved in one that's in a small town called Dannevirke. These are named projects, as the other ones are, because they're on the websites for other teachers to explore. And it's a whole community as part of this project. Every early childhood centre in school has a teacher involved in it, and so they're trying a whole community approach to transition. They're actually trying to work on it across all levels, through to high school and beyond. The little piece I'm part of is the early childhood to school one. So I think what's exciting about all of these is the teachers undertaking the research, and why would they do that? They're busy people, but I think it's the passion that they have for their work and wanting to enhance that, and then the ability they have to share that with others is really engaging. This is the teacher from the first one, and I think that sense of pride when you actually put the covers on a report. But that team of teachers is still researching. They've been involved in lots of other projects since, and it's the dissemination. When they go and speak about their practice, it's much better than someone like me coming to speak for them. So there you go, a few examples about teachers creating tools for change, and I think it's having a really key impact on all sorts of people's transition practices.